Word. Cool. All right. So welcome to animation. Has anyone here like animated before at all? Anything in Maya? Okay, a few hands. Show of hands, who has used the graph editor? Okay, so that's a lot of people, so that's good. So graph editor is really important. We'll go over that, and that's going to be your main tool for animating. It's just going to be basically a visualizer for whatever control or object that you are moving in space. And it'll show you visually, oh, it's moving this fast on the x-axis, or it's moving this slow on like its rotate. And we'll go more into that. But to begin, I did a little practice before I came here, and I made this ball bounce, and it goes like this, boom, 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 boom. But you notice it's going insanely fast. And this is mistake number one all people starting animation make, is they don't have it playing at the correct speed. And to change that, you go down to this bottom right, or at least this is how I do it, where it says the play button, you right click it, and then you go up here to playback speed, and then you press it to real time. And so now it will be playing it in real time. So it's not going to be like it's not going to be jumping the gun, like trying to go fast. And I don't really know why there's other options. You should always be wanting it to play at real time. Cool. So next thing that you're going to want to do is you're going to want to get your graph editor. And the way I do that is by going to Windows, Animation, Graph Editor. And you're going to notice I say the way I do it is because just like anything in Maya, there's 100 ways to do everything and get the same result. So I'm just going to be teaching you my way and the way I was taught and the way I think it's best done. Also, right here in the bottom right, I'll be using like hotkeys and stuff. So if you're like wondering, how's he doing that? It'll show down here. For some reason, it doesn't show my mouse buttons, which is kind of lame. So I'll have to like verbally let you know when I'm like middle mouse button clicking and stuff. I also have a really bad problem of not explaining things as I'm doing things because it just like doesn't register in my mind that like, oh, I need to explain this. So just like raise your hand if I like go over something too fast. But anyways, let's get started. So basics of the graph editor. So the best way to use the graph editor is just to go one channel at a time. As right here, you can see it. We'll take a look at this bouncing ball, and I have three things happening right here. However, I did not do all of these at the same time. First, I started with my translate Y. So if I'm just going to back out of this and delete these keyframes. I'm going to back out of this, delete those keyframes. Now I'm at translate Y. And if I do this, this is what I started with. And so I just made this bounce, and I'll show you how I did that. And then I went in, and then I added a translate. So it was translating Y, and then I added, you can kind of think of this like Photoshop layers. I added in another layer but now it's just animating on the X-axis. So now it's bouncing up and down, and it's also translating to the X, and it's doing it in this motion right here. So this is what the graph editor is really useful for. It just shows you a visual representation of how it's moving in space. Like right here, you can see it's moving pretty linearly, and then it kind of eases out and comes to a stop. And then I'm just pressing Control Z to undo. And then I wanted it to maybe go this way. So now it's combining this translate X and this translate Z, and it's making a diagonal motion like that. So that's just kind of the basics. That's like my thought process whenever I'm about to animate something. I don't try to go in and oh, I'll set a key here and then I'll go over here and I'll move this over here and then do that. Like, no, because that's just going to look terrible. So you usually just want to take your object and start one channel at a time. So I'm going to hide that for now. And I'm just going to quickly go over like how I even did that in the first place. So, and you'll notice actually, let me undo that hide. I actually messed up on this. This should be like rolling as it bounces, and it's not rolling. That's why that blue stripe isn't rolling across it. So I'm going to make sure that I get that correct this time. So I'm going to hide that. Cool. So this is our sphere. This is our little ball. And generally when I start this, has anyone ever grouped something before in Maya? You know, like Control Z, put it in a group. Ignore my messy outliner, but this is what we're working with, P-Sphere 2. So when I do something kind of complicated, which is like when something's rotating and translating at the same time, I'll take my object and I'll group it. And whenever you group something in Maya, your pivot point goes to origin, which is really stupid. And so if you want to fix that, you just press this button up here and it moves it back to where your ball is. So I'll call this one rotate, GRP, sure. And then I will group it again, and then I'll call this one, and then see my pivot point went over there. And so now I'll do this, bring it back up here, and I'll call this one translate, GRP. So now I'm just going to be, whenever I'm working on this ball, I'm only going to be translating on this group, and I'm only going to be rotating on this group. And then this guy is just along for the ride. So, and then, but this is where I'm going to be doing most of my animation. So for this translate group, we'll start with what we did with how you saw it with the translate Y. And if we look up here, right now, this is at 0, 0, 0 all the way across. So if I like do this and then I set this back to 0, well, if I select that and set that back to 0, it goes to there. However, I want this to start here and I want it to bounce down here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually do something called moving the pivot point. And to do that, has anyone ever moved a pivot point before in Maya? To do that, how I do it is you press D on your keyboard, and then you can move your pivot point around like this. If you hold V, you can actually snap the pivot point to vertices. So I'm going to take this, I'm going to pull it all the way down. So now my pivot point is at the bottom right here. All right, so I have my translate group, my pivot point's at the bottom. I'm going to just take this guy and while holding D again, I'm going to pull this down and now it's going to snap to this plane that I have. So that means this vertex on the bottom is perfectly touching that plane. And right here you can see translate Y is at -9, which is kind of weird because I would think if this is bouncing, translate Y would be at 0. So to fix that, there's this handy tool called Create Transformations. We press that and boom, now this is the new origin. So now if I do this and I set all of this back to 0, it just goes to there. So that's usually how I start when I think about things. I think about, okay, I want this placement like where like its main position, I want that to be at 0, 0. And yeah, and again, I'm in my translate group. Sometimes I always forget and I'll accidentally select this, but I need to remember to keep selecting this translate group. So anyways, I am blabbering. Let's make this animate. So I'm going to start this off at 10. And if you want to be kind of advanced in animating, you can use this little tool down here called auto key, which means if you press this, well, actually, I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up a bit. So I'm going to set this to 10. And then I'm going to go to my frame 1 and I'm going to press S. And whenever you press S, that sets a keyframe on every single channel on this group. All right. And now I'm just going to go over maybe 10 frames. Right now, I don't care about timing. It's going to look terrible. So I'm just going to get all the basic motion done first, and then I'll worry about timing later. So I started on frame 1. I'm going to go to frame 10, and then I'm going to set this to 0. Boom. Now it's down there. I'm going to press S, and voila, we have a curve. Now it's translating in the Y direction from 10 to 0 over 10 frames. So every frame, it's translating 1 unit. Cool. Now, what I was saying earlier is like if you really want to be fancy, you could turn this guy on. This is called auto key, but it can be really finicky sometimes, which means now, like if I wanted to, let's say it bounces back up, it goes up to 7 now. It just set a key there for me automatically without me having to press S. That's all auto key does. It's just setting a key so you don't have to press S. However, you have to keep that in mind whenever you're moving things, because sometimes you can be like, oh, I want it to be over here. Okay, now let's see it bounce up and down, and then it does like this crazy thing where it does that. So like you have to keep that in mind. So if you're a beginner and you're not super familiar with this, I don't recommend using auto key. I just recommend pressing S. So anyways, we're at frame 20. It bounced up to 7. Cool. Let's go to frame 30 and put it back to 0 because it's bouncing back down. Boom. And now I'll press S, and now we have this. Let's go to frame 40, and let's say maybe it bounces up to 4 this time. Cool, I'll press S, and then I'll go to the frame 50, again, 0, boom, press S, and this is kind of repetitive, but you get the point, and then I think that was 4, so now this one I'll maybe just make it at 1. I'll press S, and then I'll go to frame 70, and then I'll press 0, and I'll press S again. All right, sick. We have our animation. Let's see what it looks like. Oh yeah, it looks like a ball that does not look like it's bouncing at all. Well, let's clean up our graph editor a little bit. I hate it with all these things right here, all these like red things, because then you get all of these channels that you're not even using. Right now, we're just focusing on translate Y. So I'm going to select all of those, and you can right click and press cut selected, and I'll get rid of all of those keyframes. And you can do the same thing for this one. So now you see over here, it's nice and clean. We have this translate Y right here, and it's the only thing that we're looking at. Cool. So when a ball bounces in real life, you can see that, when a ball bounces in real life, it comes down, it gains speed, it gets faster and faster, and then the second it hits the surface, it bounces back up and it gets faster and faster as it goes back up until it slows down, and it gets faster and faster as it goes back down again. That's not what's happening down here. Down here, you can see it's easing into a fall, and then it's easing out of the fall right before it hits the surface, and then it eases back into the motion, and it's just constantly easing back and forth from these keyframes that we have. And that's what Maya does by default. Anytime you set a key, it's gonna make it an ease in and ease out. That's what it's called. However, balls don't do that. That was a weird way to say it. Gravity doesn't do that. Gravity doesn't do that in real life. When something falls, it just gets faster and faster until splat and it just hits the ground. So we need this to be linear. So we can grab these keyframes down here. You can just click and drag keyframes like that. And I like to use these little tools up here in the top of the graph editor. Specifically, this one right here, I use this one a lot. It's for linear tangents. So if I click this, you'll see, boom. Now this looks more like how a ball bounces in real life. It hits the ground and bounces back up with like equal amount of power until it reaches the top, and then it just gets lower and lower every time. So now let's watch it. Okay, it's looking better. Like I said, the timing looks awful because we haven't worked on timing yet, but we'll get to that. Again, since this is kind of free falling from the beginning, we don't want this to ease into it. So again, I'll grab this one and I'll also make that one linear. So now it's just linearly falling, and then it's just kind of bouncing like that. But it's looking really floaty. Also, how I'm making it play right now, the hotkey for that in Maya is Alt-V, which is dumb because you think it'd be spacebar, but spacebar does this silly thing instead. So it's Alt-V. And that's just something I've gotten used to. So now we have this ball bouncing. It looks great. Now we just need to fix the timing. So now this is where you just start moving keyframes around until it looks good. So right here, this is usually what I do. I'll just click and drag keyframes. I'll move it over like that. We'll be like, okay, that first fall looked good. Now I'll just kind of grab these. I'll move these over like that. And this is literally just playing it over and over and over again until it looks like you think it should. So like right here, like I think maybe this looks all right, but like right here, it's definitely looking pretty floaty. So, again, I'm getting ahead of myself. When you move keyframes in the graph editor, if you move them like this, if like what I'm doing right now is just with my right hand, I'm just left clicking and dragging. That actually, you can set these keyframes in between frames. So you'll see right here, or I guess that's at 63. But Maya doesn't know that you want a keyframe to be at a certain frame. So it'll set it at like 62.00059 or whatever. And you don't want that because Maya will freak out sometimes and it'll make your animation like glitch out. So in order to get around that, you need to shift middle mouse button drag, and that will snap all of your keyframes to a frame perfectly on the 0 instead of like adding all these crazy decimals after it. Does that make sense? Cool. So yeah, so I'm shift middle mouse button clicking these keyframes around until this looks right. So right there, it looks kind of floaty, so I'm gonna move that in. I'll move this in, and then maybe that. Start it from the beginning. And so this is just a lot of just repeating. And then, let's see. Sure. I could go for like 30 minutes trying to make this look perfectly like a ball bounces, but for the most part, it looks pretty decent. Maybe this part can just be a little bit less floaty. And like you can see, I'm just kind of, like I said, dragging keyframes around so it looks a bit more like how I think it should look. I think this last one, maybe just like that. Cool. So we have that done. And maybe like overall, we just want this to happen a little bit faster. How could we kind of scale these in a bit more? Well, you can do that by in the same way that if you press R on your keyboard, when you select an object, it puts it in the scale mode. You can do the same thing with keyframes. If you click and drag these, also, I'm just going to say this is just a random fact. If you press 3 on your keyboard, whatever you have selected, it'll like normalize the view to make it a better view. Yeah, so scaling. So if you press R, like you're in scale mode, you can actually scale these in and out to make it faster. However, that can also, like I said, cause a problem where it's putting keyframes in between frames. So after you scale it, you need to then move it and just kind of like offset it and then offset it back. And then Maya will automatically put it back on the exact frame that it needs to be. Cool. Oh, you don't need to hold R, you just need to press it. That puts it into scale mode, and then you can do that. To get it back into move mode, you press W, just like you would over here. Yes, sorry, I'm shift middle mouse dragging for that. Yeah, sorry, thanks for asking. Another cool tool that I've been using recently that's way better than that scale tool is if you click and drag a certain amount of keyframes, and then this little button with the box, it's called region tool. And then you can actually just kind of, oh my gosh, you can just like really easily scale them that way. So that's a much better way. That's the way I've been doing it recently. I honestly didn't know that tool existed, but then you have to do the same thing where you like move it forward one frame, move it back one frame. So it all snaps to it. So boom, let's call that good for the sake of moving on. I'm like a perfectionist, so sometimes it's hard for me to move on from things, but I'm gonna do it. Sweet. Now let's have this translate to the right, and to do that, we'll go back to frame one. And so we have this translate Y motion happening. Oh my gosh, I actually don't like how that looks now. Sure. Oh my gosh, why am I doing this? We're gonna call that good. We're gonna go back to frame one, and then now we go back to our translate group. And you can either press S. Something that I like to do if I'm just focusing on one channel is just going up to the translate X and just pressing key selected. And then I can just solo this, and I can scrub all the way to whenever this one ends. So this one ends at frame 32. So now I'm at this frame, and I can move this way and press S, or I can do key selected, and that'll create this curve right here. And then I can make that linear because I don't want it to ease in and ease out of the motion. I just want it to linearly bounce. Now, this ball looks kind of funny because it just comes to an exact stop right at the end there. And if we wanted to just kind of roll out of this, I could copy this, Command C, and then I could go to the end of here and I could Command V, paste a keyframe. Now, whenever you paste something or insert any keyframe, Maya doesn't know how to interpolate it. It doesn't know what you're making. It doesn't know if this is a character or an object. It just tries to interpolate whatever keyframes you have in a funny way. And it does this for some reason. And so like if I did this, it's just like it does something really weird, right? Luckily, there's a super easy fix for that. You can just click and drag. I usually just drag both of them, or click and drag both of them. And then there's this A button. I have never pressed any of these. These are like super subtle finite things, differences like the E, M, C, but I usually always press A, and that creates a nice clean interpolation between the two. And then I can shift middle mouse button click, drag this up. And so now this will like slowly come to a stop like that. So that's generally how I do it. And then I could go into, like I said, like adding a translate Z, so it's going in diagonal. But really quickly, just for the sake of time, oh my gosh, this went faster in my head. So now let's have this rotate really quick. This will be the same thing that we're doing, but we're gonna look at this and I'm like, okay, I just have it memorized. I know Z equals blue, and I want it to rotate like this. So we're gonna start here at 1. I'll go to my rotate Z, key that, and remember, I'm doing this on the rotate group. I'm not doing this on the translate group. And there's a reason for this, because if you do it like on this one, we have our pivot point down here, remember? Because we set this at 0. So if I were to rotate Z here, it like rotates it around this pivot point, which we don't want because that would be really weird. So we go to this rotate group where the pivot point's in the middle. And then we can do this all the way to 32, because that's, I remembered that's where our bouncing animation ended. And I can copy this keyframe. Also, I'm dragging out of here. You can navigate the graph editor the same way that you do in Maya, just like Alt middle mouse button clicking, Alt right click dragging. You can also just like use your middle mouse button to scroll through it. I'm gonna copy this one, paste it. I just have a habit of always just copying and pasting that if I'm just doing something quick. And this is just gonna be constantly rotating. So now I'll middle mouse button shift drag this up. And I want it to, and sometimes I just have to like zoom out really far. And so maybe something like that. So I just drag that down. I'll make this all linear so it's constantly. Also, if you have something selected in the graph editor, just like in Maya, you press F and it'll focus on it. So now let's see how this looks. I'll press Alt V to play it. oh, and it stops at the end. So I know I need to go to my rotate group, copy this keyframe, go to the very end, paste it. It does a funny interpolation thing. We'll press auto tangent. That's what that A stands for. And then I'll just kind of like let it roll out of that nice and evenly. Yeah. And that's the joy of animation, is just playing it over and over and over until it looks right. So boom, yeah, that ended up working out better than I thought. So yeah, so that's how I go about animating something. I think about it in just one channel at a time, especially if it's a prop. Characters are much different. Let's get to the next thing. Boom, pivot points. It's a cool transition, right? I use layers. So pivot points are really interesting because, just like how I said, if you utilize pivot points like how we did with this, like putting the pivot point at the bottom, it makes your life a lot easier. So we can go down here and use a pivot point for this car. So for this car right here, this is from our short record breaker from like a year ago. Alexia and Rebecca worked on it. I don't think anyone else in here did. But this is our car model. This is like an old model, like before we had the wheels. But if I wanted to like animate this guy going around this cylinder, it would be very challenging to press S here, move it. Oh, okay, wait. Press S here, move him forward, turn him, move him forward a little bit, and then go here and then press Alt. Yep, see, I forgot auto key wasn't on. So like press S here, go forward 10 frames, move this forward, do that. Like you can see like how that wouldn't work. Oh my gosh, I just did it again because I'm used to auto key. Press S. It just looks really weird, and that would just be a huge hassle. Is all I'm trying to say. What you could do instead is take your car, group it. I can name it something like pivot, and then well, yeah, if it was like right here, we can do the same thing that we did earlier, which was press D and move the pivot point. And you can just grab this middle part right here and just press V, and I'm going to move it to the center of this right here. If I press Alt 5, you'll see the wireframe. So there's just a vertex right there that I'm snapping to. And then I can just rotate this guy around it. So instead of animating it like that, I can just press S on this pivot group and then go forward and then say, oh, I want to rotate Y 360 degrees. And then press S. Oh, wait. And then press S because we are not using auto key. And if we press play, now it's just animating this group that the car is under, but it's pivoting around the centers. All right, makes sense? So that's why pivot points are really cool. Another really cool thing is curves. If you have anything that's going to be, I guess, this is hard for me to find a specific thing that this is useful for, but things flying through a scene, like for the Witch's Team, you have a bunch of objects flying through the scene. It'd be really tedious to animate an object just kind of traveling through space. Another thing is like cars on the road. It's really hard to animate like a car translating and rotating at the same time. So what you can do is create a curve. And I created this curve. I can show you how I did it really quick. I went into the top view. And if you go up here to create, there's all these things that you can choose from. I choose curve tools and I do CV curve tool. And then you can just kind of click around and it will create a curve from wherever you click, which is really cool. So I just made a really quick one like this, this like little, loopy thing. So now if I grab this car right here, car 1, I'll group it and I'll call this is what's called a motion path. So I'll call this motion path. And I will reset the pivot so it's on him. And then I'll take this, so we're going to attach this car to this curve so it follows it. And this is really important. Wherever this pivot point is where it's going to be attaching the car to the curve. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to isolate it really quick by pressing Control-1. That isolates anything that you have selected. And I'm going to move the pivot all the way to the bottom by pressing D, holding down V, bringing it to the bottom. So now it's snapped at the very bottom to where the wheels are. And just to make sure, I can even like put my cursor right there. So now I know it's right where the wheels are. So now my pivot point's at the bottom. And I can grab this curve and I can grab this motion path by holding Control and clicking, going up to constraint, motion paths. And again, this constraint tool is usually something that you'd see in rigging. So you might, if you're in modeling, you might have to switch to rigging or animation, but you do constraint, motion path, and attach the motion path. If we go back to frame 1, oh yeah, he's Tokyo drifting around. He's sideways, right? Well, there's an easy way to fix that. if we do that all over again, okay, get out of here. If we do that all over again, if we select this and then select, which one was it? The motion path, constraint, motion paths, press this box. We see right here that this blue one is facing forward, and that's our Z. So if we go to front axis, we set front axis to Z, and then we press attach, we'll see that now he is correctly following the curve, and he is going so fast. So maybe we want to slow him down a bit. You would think that you would select the curve to slow him down, right? But instead, you actually have to select this group that you named a motion path, and you can name it anything you want. I just named it motion path. You can name it like car or whatever. But whatever you attach the curve to, you have to select that. And then this is the speed at which he's going. So like when he starts, he's like easing in, and then he's going at constant speed. But like maybe I just want him to slow down a lot. So I'm just gonna drag that out there like really far. So now he's, and then I can even like extend this out. So now he's going a bit more normal speed. What's really cool about this is you can change this curve in real time, and he will also change to it. So if I take this curve, and if you right click a curve, there's this option for control vertices. Then you can select these control vertices, and I like to do it with soft selection. So you can hold B and soft select it out like that. I might have to change this so it's just on surface, so it's not affecting that guy. You can like change the curve, and the car or whatever you have will follow. So all you need to do is create a curve, and then that curve is dictates however your thing will animate. I also used sweep mesh. I don't know if you guys have ever used sweep mesh before, but you can create meshes along curves too, and it's the same principle. So you can actually like pull this up, and the sweep mesh will follow along the curve. And then I also have this car on the motion path, so you can create like a little, like, I don't know, like race car. Oh yeah, sure. Let me just delete the sweep mesh. Yeah, so if I delete this, it's super easy. You just select a curve. Again, up to create, just the same place where we saw the curve tools. It's the one right under it called Sweep Mesh. And this is only in Maya 2022. So it's not on Maya 2020. You select this. By default, it gives you like a cylinder. And this is a really good way to make rope also. But like you can like do a whole lot of cool things with this. For this one, I just made a rectangle, and then I just turned the width up. Right here, it says like the width is locked at 2, but you can just type in something different. Like I typed 15. And then I like zoomed in here. Okay, I know there's probably way better ways to do that, but then I just like did that, and then that's how I made the road. And then like again, like I said, you can just select another fun tidbit. There's this thing up here. If you like turn that off, it'll make it so you don't select polygons, which is kind of nice. So I just did that for that. But like then you can change that, and it'll move to that curve. So it's really cool. You can also make, I know I'm getting off of animation now, so I'll stop here in a second. But you can also make rope with it really cool. If I even remember how, just distribute. Yeah, so you can like have this travel along the curve, and then you can choose the number of instances. And then there's a way to like scale or rotate it. Is it rotate like that? I think you just have to turn it up like really far, like 720 or something. I could be wrong, but there is a way to like twist it. There's a twist. Oh, okay, cool. Yeah, thank you. Oh, well, this is not, maybe if I set it to like 10, but like you can kind of see it's just because it's super long. But yeah, you can do a lot of cool things with Sweep Mesh, but that's not why we're here. We're here to learn about animation. But that's all I had to show about pivot points and curves. Moving on to the next thing. How much time do I have? It is 3. Okay, I'm gonna try to go for maybe 15 more minutes because I want to respect y'all's time. So I know some of you guys are animating props and stuff, not just characters. I love animating props for some reason. I think it's fun. And it's really tedious, so it's really not that fun. But like if we have like these books here, and we want these to like fall over on top of each other, I already did this earlier, but like usually when you select a book, your pivot point's going to be somewhere in the middle of the book. Same concept as earlier. Instead of going here and then like rotating it and then translating it and rotating it and then translating it, you can just set the pivot point by, I do it by isolating, like I said, Control-1, pressing D, holding V. You can just snap it to the bottom of there, and then you can just boom, just animate it like that. So that's super easy, way easier than like working from a pivot point in the middle. However, like I said, whenever you are going to do something like that, generally you want to group it and then animate the group, or I mean, move the pivot point on the group. So you can call this like book one pivot. And so now I can do this, put that down there. I'm in book one pivot, and now I can still go over here. So if I'm like, I want this to actually face this way, the book one pivot is still, or it should be still where I left it. Yeah, like right there on that edge. But then I can go into here and like change it like this if I want to. And that pivot point, I think, oh no, I think I did it wrong. Okay, ignore what I just said. But for the most part, anytime you move a pivot, you want to make a group, move the pivot on that group, and then animate that group instead of animating the object. Trust me, it just saves you a lot of hassle in the future, and then you don't have to undo things. So then you do this, move this pivot point down here, boom. And then we can just like press S here, and then like we go forward 10 frames. This is like really long, and I'm only going to be working with like 20 frames here. So you can take this gray guy at the bottom and kind of drag him down like that, so there's less to like scrub through. Then we can go forward like 10 frames, and like I said, I usually just started off by just setting everything at increments of 10 frames, and then just space things out. And I'm like, okay, from there to there, this is going to, and then like I can select that and press F to get a better visual of it, or you can press 3, either one. I'm like, okay, that's going to rotate down like that, and then I'll stop right here. I'll be like, okay, this one gets hit right here. So now I'm going to group this guy, reset its pivot, set its pivot to right here, and then I'll press S right here because I know at this instant it needs to start falling. So then I'll go to like 10, and I'm like, okay, now this guy is going to be right here. And then maybe I need to go a little bit further, and I need to push this one here, and then I can go to this guy's group. And another thing that I think is really important for people to understand is you don't have to like animate up here. You don't have to like do everything up here. You can just click and drag this keyframe and like pull it down a little bit more. So now it's just saying at this frame, be at this rotate value. And so now this goes like this, and I forgot to, I'm going to turn on auto key just for my sake, so I don't have to keep undoing things. And then at this frame, it should be like that. And so now if we scrub through this, this hits that. This should start falling a little bit before. And so I'll just take these keyframes and move them back. And so now, boom, and then so on and so forth. And then you would just, and then right here at frame 11, I would, create a group and then reset this group's pivot. This will be the last time I do this, I promise. And then press D, V, boom, put that down there. And then I'll press S right here, and then I'll move that, where I'll go forward like 20 frames or so, do that. And then at this frame, I'll have to go back to this group, and then Command C, Command V, and like put a key here, and then move that key further down like that. So that's just kind of workflow. Anytime you Command C, Command V, you always need to press that auto tangent thing. Sorry if I'm speeding up a lot. It's just because I want to respect y'all's time, and I know you all have things to do other than watch me try to animate books. So boom. And so now overall, the timing's going to be off, but like you get the idea. So boom, that's prop animation. Just always keep your pivot points in mind. Last thing I'm going to talk about, this will not take very long, is character animation. Oh, my racetrack is still there. Yeah, this character might look familiar. This was the bat from last semester. I didn't make it. I didn't rig it. That was all Gus. Gus is a genius. But this rig is like terrifying to look at because there's so many things. But we're just going to focus on just basic things about character rigs. I'm not going to try to animate this in front of you guys because that would take me like 3 hours. Anyone familiar with IK and FK? Has anyone heard that before? So IK and FK, that's something that every animator should know. It's called inverse kinematics and forward kinematics. I think that's right. And basically what that means is humans, we have two different like kind of systems. In our arms, if we're reaching for something and we're grabbing something, we're gonna start from our shoulder moves, and then our elbow moves from wherever our shoulder is, and then as we reach forward, our wrist will move from wherever our elbow is. So like so. So like we kind of move from this way going out. As for our legs, I'm sorry, and that's what FK is. That's forward kinematics. So that's the whole system of starting from the center of the mass and going out. What IK is, and this is kind of funny that I have a boot on, but IK is, it's the opposite. It's starting from the tail end of it and going into the your core motion or whatever, what the body or whatever. So this is going out of the body and this is going into the body. And why I say that is this foot right now, I'm moving all over the place. However, my foot is completely still. Like it is like not moving. It is planted in the ground, which means that my body is like pivoting around this foot. However, my hand, I can move my hand all around and this hand is like pivoting around my body. My body's completely still. Does that make sense? So like this right here, like this is controlling, like my body's movement is determined by my leg right here. However, this is determined by my body's movement. So I could like move like this, and this is gonna follow. Like I could do this, and my arm is gonna follow no matter what. For this, I can like squat and stuff like that, and my leg is not gonna move. This will make more sense in a second, I think. It is a little difficult to understand, and I honestly didn't really understand it until like 6 months ago, or not even then, like 4 months ago. So it's a little confusing at first, but hopefully this will help you understand it. So let's see, what is our character in? So our character is in FK right now. So that means I can take this leg and I can move it like this. Gus's rig is a little funny, so hopefully it doesn't do anything crazy. But this is like how arms operate. So like I was saying, like we can move this shoulder, like and wherever this shoulder moves, the elbow and wrist follow. Wherever the elbow moves, the wrist follows, and wherever the wrist moves, the fingers follow. So let's switch this to IK, and we'll see what it looks like. Oh, Gus's rig, he has these little handles called K. And so I just selected that. And then up here, and this is a pretty advanced rig. I'm not sure if any of you guys will have this, but this is called an IK-FK switch, which allows your rig to switch seamlessly from IK, from like an FK motion to an IK motion. So up here, he has this channel where it says left arm IK, FK switch. So it was on FK. So if I moved it like this, and then I go to this and I change it to IK, it'll actually snap back to its IK position. So now notice these controls that were controlling the FK of the arm, right now they're not doing anything. I can move these around and nothing's gonna happen. Instead, this control now has dominance over the hand. And instead of moving it from the shoulder, it actually moves the wrists and the hand follows it. So this looks a lot more organic. It looks a lot nicer, but there's pros and cons to each one. I'm actually going to hide these wings. Well, I'm gonna hide these wings because they're really messed up, and that was like a nightmare animating around those wings. But yeah, so like as you can see, this is just one control, and it moves everything, and it's just based off of this this control's position. There's also one more control that you need to know about IK, and that's called a pull vector. And that's what Gus has as this X here. And this is what controls the angle of the elbow. So if she's going to be like reaching for something, maybe like this needs to be out more here, and then this needs to come forward like that. And then I can rotate this hand to kind of rotate around like that. But like maybe I want her like arm to be a bit more back. So this is just like a direct line out of her elbow, like wherever that is, it's like a string attached to her elbow. That's where that will move. So maybe I need to move this back a little bit. Whoop. Boom, move that back. And then, yeah, and then you can really see it happening. So that's IK. And then again, if I go up to this IK FK switch, boom, now we just switched back to FK mode. And now I can select these controls that are around her arm, like her shoulder control and her elbow control. And so it's just an easy way to like seamlessly switch between two different ways of animating. There's no wrong or right way to animate all the time. There's just really helpful things that you can do that would make your life easier. For example, and I'm almost done. Yeah, I'm almost done. I have like 3 minutes. Like feet, when a character is walking, you almost always want, I mean, I would say you always want your character's feet to be an IK because yeah, we'll switch this over to IK. I'll take this one and switch this one over to IK because like I said, feet are naturally planted into the ground and your body moves around your feet. If we did this, like if I was going to have her move forward like this, you'll see that like, yeah, her legs kind of, yeah, whatever. It like her feet are completely determined by where this is. In fact, it's so determined that the feet try to stay on those IK switches no matter what. But like I can move this around to try to help better position that. But for the most part, like IK makes the most sense for animating feet, and FK makes the most sense for animating arms because that's just how humans work. We work this way, and then for legs, we work from the foot up because the foot is what's holding us up. Again, I'm not an animator, so I'm sorry if that explanation was very poor, but that's my understanding of it, my very shallow understanding of it. But yeah, before we wrap up, does anyone have any questions? Want me to go over anything else? Yeah.
Use groups for character animation as well.
Well, yeah, I mean, you can consider these controls kind of like a group, but that's more of a rigging question. Generally, like when you're going to be animating a character, you're just animating these controls, and the rigger takes care of all of that, all of the like grouping and things like that. When you're just doing quick prop animation, that's what I mean by, oh, group this and animate the group. But the rigger will go in and make sure that everything works correctly. So all you have to worry about is animating this guy right here, like these controls. So you just go in here, and then you shouldn't have any problems. But yeah, no, you don't need to go into here and take this and then group this control or anything.
And does your workflow look the same as far as like doing like the X quantum and like loading?
Um, Character animation is much more complex than props. The reason why I went layer by layer in props is just because it's very like, I don't know, very simple to think of it that way. But with character animation, if they're reaching in something, you're going to be translating and rotating at the same time. And that's just a completely different lecture, I would say. From what I've heard from animators is they will literally go and they'll say frame one, okay, we're gonna put her like in a pose so she's about to start walking. Just for simplicity's sake, I'm just gonna put these back in IK or FK mode. And so like if she's about to start walking, there we go. She's about to start walking, and we'll grab this. She's like leaning forward. Let me turn that off. So she's like about to walk this way, and her arms are going down like that. And then boom. And like this is how I'll see a lot of animators do it. And they'll be like, okay, cool. I like this. This looks good. She's about to start walking. I'm gonna select literally every single control like that, select everything, and press S. And it's going to key every single control there. And they're like, cool, I'm going to go forward one frame. You go forward one frame by doing Alt caret, that little guy, or yeah, that little guy right there. You can go forward one frame. And then they're like, okay, on frame two, I'm gonna put her in a kind of relatively next position. So maybe now she's just more like, well, maybe she's more like this way, and like her foot or like she's like leaning a bit more this way. I'm not super familiar with this rig, so I'm just kind of winging this, and like, well, and her back foot is like this or whatever, and her foot is kind of like planted down like that. Oh my gosh, ignore that. But they'll literally go like one frame, next frame, and then they'll go to the next frame. But they're not like doing it like incrementally, like every single tiny little frame, because then they can just, or I'm sorry, they do this, and then they'll select all of that, and then they'll press S to key all of the controls. And then once they get these kind of positions right, they're animating pose to pose. So they'll make one pose, they'll make another pose, they'll make another pose, and then they'll go and they'll take all of these keyframes and then they'll drag them out. So maybe like her step is going to take like 8 frames or whatever. So now she does like that. So they just started on frame 1, they made a pose. Frame 2, they made a pose. Frame 3, they made a pose. Frame 4, they made a pose. When they're happy with all the poses, they clicked and dragged the keyframes out until like they were happy with the timing from one pose to another. And then they can go back and really finitely like be like, oh, maybe just for this one control, maybe like she's rotating a little bit too much. So I'm going to take this rotate X and like bring that down a little bit just for that one control. So I'm not an animator, so I don't really, I can't, I'm not a character animator at least, so I can't really answer that super well, but I do know, especially from hearing from the people in the character animation class, that's like how they've been taught. It's just to, or at least that's a good workflow. It's just make a bunch of poses, like all within 10 frames, and then space them out. Yeah.
Also, if you work in animation layers, and you start off and you do like walking, but you make a layer for the hips, and then you kind of just work your way down, and then work your way up. Kind of like you start with your center of gravity and get both
Yeah. I've never used animation layers because I'm not an animator, but I do know people use these all the time. You'd have to watch a tutorial on them because I can't speak for this. I've never used it, but I do know it's really helpful and it's probably a pretty good workflow. Definitely watch some tutorials, like just if you guys are gonna animate a character walking, watch a walk cycle tutorial because it's gonna make your life a lot easier and they're probably gonna do it a lot better than you are on your first attempt. Because this animating is really hard. And as you can see, it's just looking at a bunch of colorful lines and it's really confusing sometimes. So
also, I might add that if you're doing a walk cycle, for instance, and you don't want to see the in-betweens, but you want to get the timings of the pose correct, you can actually select right there, there's like a Z in there, but it's right next to the blue arc. But that one where it's like a step.
Oh, right. Yeah, doing it in steps. Right, yeah. So now it'll like, yeah, boom, boom. So you can just kind of time it out a bit more that way. Yeah, that's good. That's definitely a good idea. I do that a lot for layout too. So that's nice. Any last questions? Cool. Thanks for listening to me ramble about things I don't really do, but kind of know some things. Appreciate it, guys. All right, y'all are free to go.